This is the story of a caver that tried to take on a cave that ended up turning against them. Some believe this accident was simply an act of God. Is located in the Sierra de Alvarez Mountains, 30 miles, 50 kilometers east of the city San Luis Potosi. The cave is not visited frequently because it is off the map, and although it has been mapped, there is a lot of mystery and intrigue surrounding the cave. Temperatures in the cave are low. Vegetation grows thickly at the mouth, and the cave floor is covered in a thick layer of debris and guano. The fungi in the guano may cause histoplasmosis in humans. Histoplasmosis is an infection caused by breathing in spores of a fungus, often found in bird and bat droppings. People usually get it from breathing in the spores when they become airborne. The cave floor and walls are inhabited by millipedes, scorpions, insects, and snakes. This cave can only be entered by rappelling down into it. It is extremely dangerous due to the unsettled earth within the cave. Everything is kind of crumbling and falling apart. If an accident occurs while you are on a climbing rope, it is absolutely critical to get the injured or unconscious caver off the climbing rope as quickly as possible, preferably within 15 minutes. Lowering the caver to the bottom of the pit or performing a pick-off and rappelling with them to the bottom might be possible when circumstances permit. Sometimes it might be better to get the patient back down to the bottom, keep them warm and stable, and then you can wait for help. Cavers should develop and practice these skills before entering a cave like Sotano del Aire. Christy Quintana spent a lot of time caving in Texas. Sometimes her husband, Sean Quintana, will go with her on these particular adventures. She joined the caving community in 1995. She was the type of caver that always had a smile on her face and was open to meeting and caving with anyone who wanted to join her. She had a passion for caves and inspired her friends to go on more caving explorations, even if they had more experience caving than her. Christy had another side to her though. She had the desire to explore the caves that no one had ever seen before. She really wanted to find places that were unknown. Finding a new cave to map out is what excited her. During spring break 1998, Christy went on a trip to Mexico with her friends, Dan Bernard and Terry Raines. They are both cavers with over 30 years of experience. The group was on the hunt to find a unique cave to explore in Mexico. They started in the Ciudad Valles and went to Canali, which has a massive limestone band. Limestone is by far the most numerous of all cave types, and this particular part of Mexico had a lot of them. Christy could not be happier knowing that she had so many different caves to choose from this particular region of Mexico. A guide led them up a mountain toward a rumored unknown cave. After about an hour and a half, the guide made a sharp left turn away from the stream they were using to navigate and found the cave a short distance away. The cave sloped downward, following the angle of the rock layers. They threw a rock into the cave and estimated it to be about 328 feet, 100 meters deep. Although they were tempted to rig the pit with jungle vines, they postponed their descent until they could return with the appropriate rope at a later time. Unfortunately, the hike back to the truck turned out to be a bit further than they had hoped, and they never returned to the cave with the gear they needed. This upset Christy. She couldn't get this experience off of her mind. She became obsessed with finding a cave like this off the grid that she could explore. Before they left Mexico, they visited a tourist cave called the Cave of Swallows, or Sotano de las Golondrinas. It is an impressive natural abyss, and the mouth is around 196 feet, 60 meters in diameter, and its depth reaches 1,679 feet, 512 meters. Next morning, they walked up the hill to see Golondrinas in the fog. They met a man while they were observing the cave, and he told Christy about a cave hardly anyone knew about and had not been documented. The cave he mentioned to her was called Sotano del Aire. When Christy returned to the States, she immediately started to plan the trip to this cave. Christy wanted to stay in San Luis Potosi, Mexico, near the cave and go to a Spanish school. This would help her get a better understanding of the culture and practice caving skills before the attempt. She spent several weeks learning Spanish and living with a local family as part of the school program. She joined the APME, a very active caving organization in the area. It was natural for Christy to get together with them and enjoy visiting the many caves nearby. She was welcomed with open arms by the local cavers, and they appreciated her optimistic and adventurous outlook. Christy told a few of these cavers about the cave, Sotano del Aire, that she heard about and asked them if they wanted to join her. They said yes, with zero hesitation. Things were going according to plan for Christy, and she could not be happier. On Sunday, August 22nd, 1999, Christy and her friends would visit Sotano del Aire. The group consisted of Christy, Alfredo Silva, Sergio Santos Armas, Miguel Angel, Rocio Medina, and Cuauhtemoc Sanchez. The group left San Luis at about 10 a.m. and arrived at Sultano de Piedra at about 11 a.m. After parking their truck, they began the 2-hour hike to Sotano del Aire. Once they arrived at the cave, the entrance was checked for loose rocks and then rigged so the rope hung free of the edge. This was essential because rockfalls could be triggered if the rope cut into the cave wall. Miguel, Christy, Rocio, and Cuauhtemoc descended 764 feet, 233 meters, down the entrance pit. Alfredo and Sergio did not go into the cave. They remained topside and left the entrance at about 4 p.m. They decided to take a look around the outside of the cave to see if they could find any other entrances that might be easier to go into. They returned at about 7 p.m. At about 10:30 p.m., Sergio and Alfredo heard a massive collapse from inside the cave. When they approached the entrance, they saw a large portion of the left side of the entrance had collapsed and it had fallen deep down into the pit. Sergio and Alfredo immediately yelled down the pit to see if anyone had been injured. This was extremely scary for them. Miguel and Christy had been on the rope in the entrance drop, with Christy climbing first and Miguel climbing right below her. They were about 130 feet or 40 meters below the entrance when the collapse occurred. Christy was struck on the head and lower back by several large rocks, which fell more than 100 feet or just over 30 meters. This caused fractures of her cervical neck vertebrae and lower back, causing lumbar vertebrae fractures. The cervical fractures were not life-threatening at the time, but the lumbar fractures immobilized her legs. There had likely been some internal severe injury caused by the lumbar impact, resulting in life-threatening internal bleeding. The immobilization of Christy's legs was the primary life-threatening injury. Christy's immobility while on the rope made her susceptible to harness-induced pathology, known to cavers and climbers as harness hang syndrome. A severe medical condition arises when a caver is hanging immobile in a harness on a rope due to some condition as exhaustion, unconsciousness, or paralysis. The mechanics of the syndrome are not fully understood, but it is thought to be related to the impairment of circulation, resulting in shock and unconsciousness in 15 to 30 minutes. Once the collapse occurred and Christy was injured, the other group members were faced with an impossible rescue situation. Miguel was on a flowstone ramp that placed him off to the side of the pit, so the rocks missed him as they fell. He was extremely lucky. Some of the rocks came to rest on this ramp in an unstable position. Miguel quickly ascended to Christy and found that she had been severely injured and could not ascend up to the entrance of the cave. He took a look at her and realized that her legs were paralyzed. This was absolutely terrifying for Miguel. After trying his best to stabilize her and tell her that everything's going to be okay, even though he knew things were really bad and he had no idea how this was going to turn out, he realized his only option was to haul her out of the cave. He had no experience doing this, but he had to. It was essential for Christy to survive. Miguel then started climbing and reached the surface at about 11:30 p.m. He told them exactly what happened and what he thinks they need to do. They came up with a plan, and it wasn't perfect, but it was what they needed to do to try to get her out. The group began rigging a haul system to get Christy out of the cave. Having no rescue equipment available, the group had to cannibalize their own gear and make do with what's called a Georgia haul, which is simply a haul on a rope with no mechanical advantage. So this made it extremely hard for them to pull her out. It was basically their own strength that was going to yank her out of the cave. And if they lost tension, they could drop her all the way back down the cave. There was 3 large rocks still at the entrance to the cave that were very unstable by the lip. So the group first had to clear these rocks out of the way so they wouldn't fall down on top of her and hit her again. They were able to secure them by using some of their clothes and other equipment they had laying around. They began hauling at about 12:30 p.m. 2.5 hours later, they were making some good progress and somehow able to start bringing her up very close to the entrance. At this point, Christy was about 12 feet or 4 meters below the lip. Miguel rappelled down to help Christy. There was no way she was going to get out if she was going to hit that lip, not to mention that would have made her injuries even worse. At this time, Miguel realized that Christy was in extremely bad shape and he did not know if she was alive. The group decided that they needed to get her to the surface ASAP, so they put in all of their effort and started to yank her back up. However, when Christy was about 5 feet or 1.5 meters below the lip, they could not raise her any further. They just couldn't get her past this lip. It was coming over too far, and they couldn't get her through. Before giving up, they checked Christy again, and she was looking even worse than before. Sergio then hiked the 2 hours back to the truck and drove to St. Louis to get help. He arrived there at 7 a.m. Monday morning at 11 a.m., a rescue team arrived at Sotano del Aire. The group consisted of Margarita, Miguel Jones, Jorge Linderos, David Solis, and others. The rescue team first removed the loose rocks at the lip and then proceeded with what now seemed like a body recovery. At 2 p.m., Gerardo descended past a constriction at about 180 feet or 55 meters below the entrance to remove the rocks that had come to rest there the night before. Once the rocks were cleared, rescuer Tono descended to take food and water to Rocio and Cuauhtemoc, who had been trapped at the bottom by the collapse. They were stuck down there, and they wanted to get out of the cave really bad. Once the injury occurred, Christy needed to be in a trauma center within a half hour to survive. The body reacts as if there's severe bleeding going on, even though there is no actual blood loss. That is, it starts to go into shock. As the amount of blood in the circulatory system decreases due to blood pooling in the legs, the body tries to maintain blood pressure by increasing the heart rate. This creates a vicious cycle because the increased heart rate and blood pressure increase the speed at which blood gets trapped in the legs. And finally, too much blood has been trapped and the volume of the blood in the central part of the circulatory system is too small to keep the brain, heart, and other vital organs perfused with blood. Death occurs due to lack of oxygen to the brain and heart tissues. In testing done by a French caving group, it was found that healthy volunteers started having lots of trouble, dizziness, elevated heart rate, after as little as 10 minutes of hanging immobile on a rope. Loss of consciousness due to lack of oxygen to the brain occurred as rapidly as 15 minutes, and no one maintained consciousness longer than 30 minutes. These were healthy subjects with no injuries. Even if she had other injuries, Christy needed to be off that rope and back on her feet elevated within 10 minutes of the actual impact. This was simply impossible. Miguel was below Christy when the collapse occurred. Even in a perfect situation with an experienced, well-rested rescuer trained to handle emergencies, it would take at least 2 to 3 minutes to get to Christy, assess her injuries, and decide what to do, and then begin the climb. Miguel had been caving for several hours and had no formal rescue training. He had to climb another 130 feet or 40 meters before any attempt could be made to start the haul. Again, in a perfect situation, it would take a really fast climber at least 10 to 15 minutes to pass her and climb up that distance. During cliff exercises, it generally takes an experienced 10-member high-octane rescue team at least 10 minutes to build a haul system with pre-assembled equipment, and then an additional 15 minutes minimum to complete a 130-40 meter haul. That's assuming that all of the gear they need and the rigging is absolutely perfect. Even if they had somehow accomplished a miracle and gotten Christy to the surface in a short enough time to save her life, there was still a 2-hour hike from the vehicle with a severely injured patient needing spinal immobilization and intensive care. Even with a miraculous haul out of the pit, they still needed a helicopter to be waiting near the entrance in a state-of-the-art trauma center at the end of the flight. There was no way that these unfortunate souls could have saved Christy's life. It was decided that Rocio and Cuauhtemoc would be given the news of what had transpired only after they were out of the cave. At 4 p.m., the authorities arrived to take initial statements and to take Christy to the morgue. By 5 p.m., Cuauhtemoc and Rocio had ascended out of the pit and learned of the magnitude of the accident that happened the night before. The group was taken back to St. Louis by 9 p.m. Joe Ivy was a Texas caver and did a deep analysis of Christy's incident. In the 17 years Joe has caved, he has had some close calls and watched as others had close calls as well, but were left with only amazing stories to tell, not serious injuries. In the past, he has gone back to a cave he hadn't been to in a while, only to see a big collapse had occurred in the interior that certainly would have killed or injured someone if they had been there. Since collapses like these happen so seldom underground, the odds of being there when it does happen are extremely thin. Some things cannot be foreseen or avoided. Even with all of the manpower and gear at their disposal, there was still no way to get her out of that pit in time. Miguel, Sergio, and Alfredo did the best they could, but all the cards in the deck were stacked against them and Christy. I want to say thanks for watching the video, and I have another video about Joe Ivy that you might want to check out. The link is on the top of the screen. Don't forget to subscribe if you like the content, and as always, please be nice to the like button. I would really appreciate that, and I have many other disaster videos on my channel that you might want to check out. See you at the next one.